Okay, thank you. So good morning, everybody. Nice to see that there are a number of people that found a way at early Sunday morning here to see my lecture. So today I would like to take you to a virtual tour to Florida, where I was together with Peter Harbert beginning of March this year. And our major interest, as I'm an enthusiast for Pinguicula, as most of you know, was of course to see the Pinguicula species growing there in Florida. But I also wanted to show some other carnivorous plants that are growing in the vicinity or a little bit further away, just to give you an impression what kind of carnivorous plants are growing in these areas as well, not only the motherwoods. So let me start first, which Pinguicula species are present in Florida. So in total there are 6 Pinguicula species that occur there. So in alphabetic order it's Pinguicula cerulea, Pinguicula ionantha, Pinguicula lutea, Pinguicula planifolia, Pinguicula primuliflora, and last but not least Pinguicula pumila. So 5 of these species do not only occur in Florida, they also occur in other areas in the US. But there's one species which is Pinguicula ionantha, which is native to Florida, so it's just occurring in a very small area in the panhandle of Florida, in the northwestern area, but you will see on the map where this is located. So I show you roughly the distribution in Florida where all these species occur. This is a map which is based on herbarium specimens that were found in the different counties, so it's not that the distribution is exactly at the county border, it's just that in this county plants of this species is occurring. Unfortunately, Florida is now getting more and more populated by people that want to stay their retirement time there, so there's a lot of housing going on that are built there, and the problem is that the natural habitats are getting less and less because profit in the US has always priority in most cases. So a lot of species will be restricted just to preserves and state parks in the future, and we only can hope that that area is enough to keep them present. But we will see. Okay, so starting with Pinguicula cerulea, you'll see it's quite widespread in Florida. It's going to the western side, more or less at the edge of the Apalachicola River, but then going down all of Florida and here also to the southern part. The species also present in some areas. So as I mentioned before, Pinguicula ionantha is a native species to Florida, and it's really very restricted into the panhandle area in the southern part towards the sea, in the very flat and wet areas, and you will see later on the photos how that will look like. Then Pinguicula lutea is also widespread throughout Florida, so it's present almost everywhere. It's also extending towards Alabama, Louisiana, and on the other side, on the Gulf of Mexico. And a little bit similar, like Pinguicula cerulea, it's going also until south, north of Miami area. Well, then it stops because you will see later on then the climatic change there, and also the habitat is changing. It's not suited anymore for this species. Pinguicula planifolia, also not that widespread in Florida, just in the western part, starting in the Apalachicola area and going further on towards Alabama and Louisiana, but it's also a quite restricted area where this species still is growing. And then the distribution of Pinguicula primuliflora, also the habitat is very different from most of the others. It's also located or starting in the western part of Florida, but west of the Apalachicola River, so it has some overlap with planifolia, but it's starting a little bit more in the western part. And there's one little place where there was also some primuliflora found in the past, not sure if that is still existing today. Yeah, and finally Pinguicula pumila. This is the most widespread species in Florida because it covers not only the northern and the western part. This one is really going down also to the southern part and also coming towards at least the Big Pine Key is one habitat where still Pinguicula pumila can be found, and it's also growing on the neighboring Bahamas Islands as well. So that's with the most widespread species in Florida, in respect to biped, of course. So one thing I would like to touch as well is the chromosome number. Of course, they're not having all the same chromosome number. So there are two groups of Pinguicula that differ in chromosome numbers. So in the past there were some studies done in the 60s where there was some chromosome countings done for some of the species, because it's not that easy. So you mainly have to do it with root tissue to select the chromosomes in the right way, and then not too many people that are familiar with that technique. And in 2009, Jost Kasper and the technician Rosemarie Stimper were doing quite a large exercise on counting chromosome number on Pinguiculas, and so then it turned out that there are two base chromosome numbers within this group of plants. The one has 11 chromosomes and is diploid because the total number of chromosomes is 22, and this is Pinguicula pumila, Pinguicula ionanta, and also Pinguicula primulifera, because in the past, with probably not correct techniques to count the chromosomes, primulifera was considered also having 32 chromosomes, but that doesn't seem to be true. Therefore, it is now belonging to this group. And the other group has 8 chromosomes as a base, but it seems that they are tetraploid and have in total 32 chromosomes, and that is Pinguicula cerulea, planifolia, and lutea. But the interesting thing is that also in theory, as they have the same chromosome number, you could expect that there are some hybrids possible, and even in this group the same, but I am not aware of any hybrid that was ever found in nature, and even in cultivation I've never seen one, which was really occurring between those species. That might be related to the habitat, because they are not finally found in the same habitat, are not growing very side by side, maybe, but for some species, and you will see later, it theoretically could be possible, but until now it has never been reported that there are any hybrids between those species. So, some information about Florida. Florida is a very flat area, so the maximum elevation in the middle is roughly 100 meters, and also here towards Georgia and Alabama it's getting only 150 meters, so it's really flat, and so the water is draining mostly into the Gulf of Mexico and sometimes also into the Atlantic Ocean, but most of it is draining in this direction. And then you have a very wet area in the south, which at least partly is known as the Everglades area, but it's a little bit larger, where you have very wet and swampy areas, if it's not drained for any purpose, housing or agriculture, whatever. Normally it's a swampy area. So, and just to give you also an idea about climate types there, because that's playing partly a role also for my presentation to better understand the habitats. So you have one area which is a subtropical area, which is covering more or less the whole part of central and northern Florida, where you have also night temperatures in winter that can drop significantly, even below zero, depending how much cold air is coming from the north. As you know, the orientation of the mountains in the US is north to south, so if there's cold air coming from north, from Canada, there's no mountain range that protects the part behind to get flooded by this cold air. So it can happen that also frost and snow end up in Florida, but this is just happening, let's say, maximum until the middle, because further down it's getting too warm. And then you have a small part in the south, which is already a tropical area according to the climate types that have been defined. But also here you have some differences from west to the east. So here you have a savanna type, which is less rainy, and you have also a drier season in the winter time, while on the eastern side it is raining much more. And just to give you an idea, so here Interestingly, this is the most wet area, which annual precipitation of 1,600 millimeters a year, and the second highest precipitation area is here on the western coast, on the Miami side. So just to give you an idea about the climatic conditions there. So we had the chance to see quite a number of sites, and we really cover more or less the whole area of Florida for habitats that we have looked for plants, and that these are the points that we have seen during our tour in March. I cannot show all sites in detail, but at least the most important and the most interesting I will show in my presentation during the next minute. To the first site, so we are roughly about 150 kilometers north of Miami on the western side of Florida, and there is a place called Jonathan Dickinson State Park. So that's quite a large area which is protected as a state park, used a lot for recreation of the people living in this area, but only for the part. There's a lake and a lot of people going there for boat touring, but not really to looking for plants. So when you're a little bit away from the main road, then you will not see too many people anymore. Okay, and that's how it's looked like. So this is a typical longleaf pine wet savanna, so which is not only occurring in Florida but also further up in the US. So, but that is a typical area where you can find several Pinguicula species in Florida. So you see these long leaf pine trees which are quite scattered. So these trees here scattered, so it's not very dense, so there's a lot of light coming down. You have these palmetto trees which are also quite typical for this area. And then you see a lot of grass in between, so there are several species of grasses that are grown there, which are typical for this savanna type as well. And you can already see here very whitish spots, so the soil is very sandy. It's a very sandy soil, and at this time of the year still quite dry. You will not imagine that under these conditions you will really find flowering Pinguicula species. So, and it's not that they are growing everywhere. You have to walk quite a lot and look for places where you really find the plants, because they're not everywhere. And it's very much depending also on the conditions, because some difference in altitude, half a meter, makes sometimes even a difference, because it's a little bit wetter. Maybe there are some bushes there that protect the plants better, whatever. So there are very typical areas where in the end you will find the plants, and that's what I wanted to show to you. So the first species that grows in this park is Pinguicula lutea. There's a lot of places that you can find there with lutea, so it's pretty much widespread, but as at specific spots, it's not everywhere. And you see they are growing mainly underneath some grasses that gives them some protection against the sun, but there's a lot of sun going down nevertheless, so they are quite exposed to direct sunlight. As I said, the soil is very sandy, and at this part it is very, you can put your finger in and even 2 centimeters, it's barely moist. Well, we have to say this is still the dry season, so that means the rain season is starting a little bit later in the year. Maybe in April is the rainy season is starting. That means not that it's raining every day, but you have more thunderstorms, showers coming down. So it's getting wetter, so this is now the driest season. But that's the season where the plants in the end are flowering. So this is a typical rosette of Pinguicula lutea in this state park. So you see the very elongated leaves that are, where the margins is upcurved quite heavily, very long leaves there in this park. And again, as I told you before, it's very sandy. You see just pure sand on top, and even underneath you have to dig several centimeters where you get a little bit more organic mass. So not every plant is flowering, so they're flowering a lot, but not every plant is flowering, but we were lucky enough to see enough of them. So the flower of Pinguicula lutea is quite diverse. There's a lot of variability, especially at this location here. Typical is this yellow, yellow, yellow. Everything is yellow. So in the palette in the middle, which is very hairy, as you can see, this has a yellow coloration. And also the petals there are very yellow as well. There you will see some differences afterwards in other locations. And what is also quite typical is there's a lot of insertion of the petals. But there is a lot of variation, as you can see. So here, for example, you have a flower which has more venation, red venation on the base of the petals as well as inside the tube, mainly going a little bit in parallel, but there's a lot of venation also cut on the petal itself. And these petals are not overlapping, so they're not always overlapping. They can be also separated, but they have certain insertion at the end of the leaf. There's another one, just to give you an idea of the variability, with more cuneiform leaves, petals, and the inside is a little bit lighter. And as you see, the pistil has mainly whitish, greeny coloration. So just a side view of a flower. Here you see again this venation of the tube. So it's a funnel-shaped tube and a quite long spur that is finally growing after the end of the tube. So, and we were quite lucky that this was not only flowering time, we also had the chance to find quite a number of seeds. And as you can see, a seed capsule can contain quite a lot of them. So the second species of Pinguicula that was growing in this state park was Pinguicula cerulea. And as I said, they are not always growing at the same habitat. So the difference is marginal, but it plays a big role for why this species is finally growing now here. On first sight you see, well, it's not a big difference, but it's much more humid. So it's a little bit, you have to see that it's not always flat. There are always some depressions in where there's still some water standing even during the dry season. And at the border of these, I will not call it lakes, but some water standing areas, it's getting wetter, and then suddenly Pinguicula cerulea is occurring. And they're never growing together side by side with lutea. I've never seen any place like that. So this species likes much more the more wetter areas. Not really wet, but at least there must be more moisture, and then you will see cerulea occurring. We have that seen at several places where this pattern was the same. The wetter it gets, the more cerulea you will see. And if they are not flowering, one thing to differentiate the two species, because if you look at the rosette, that is not that much difference. Also elongated green, yellowish leaves. But the main differentiator is finally, if you see the flower stalks, this is very hairy. So in lutea you haven't seen any hairs, but you see a lot of hairs at the base of the flower stalk if you have a lutea, cerulea plant. So if you don't see a flower, at least here you can differentiate the both species quite easily. There weren't that many plants flowering at this site, just to give you an impression. So we have at other sites more cerulea to see, so I don't spend too much time here. So that's one example. So the typical violet coloration with the venation in different forms and intensities, and you have this palette which looks a little bit similar in form. Also very hairy, but color-wise it's different. It's from white to green. You find a lot of variation in these two color forms. And one differentiation as well is it's not this parallel venation on the tube. As you see, it's a lot more net-like venation. Yeah? So you see it better afterwards. So that's just another flower, and you see here the palette is not whitish. It's more yellowish green. It's not that yellow, but it's more cream colored. Yeah, so these were the two Pinguicula species that you can find in this park, and there are also other carnivorous plants around. So also you find a lot of utricularia there, and here we have one utricularia succulata, which is also widespread, and you find it all everywhere. And the second is Drosera capillaris, but I don't think that I have a picture here for this site. So now, on the next location, we are moving further north. You see city of Orlando, so it's quite a distance, about to 200, 300 kilometers difference. And now we are staying on the western part of Florida, but we are coming now to one location, which is also a pine leaf forest. You will see it was not possible to take a picture of the whole because it was really a forest that we had to get in. So I just have pictures of the location for the plants. But it is much more dense, less open as the savanna you've seen before, but it's also a pine leaf forest, but a little bit different. So it's much wetter here. You have always different areas where it's a little bit going up, where it's less humid, and then that's where you find the Pinguicula plants. So not, as I said, they don't like really the wet area, at least for these species. So that's how habitat for Pinguicula cerulea is looking. So it's always good if you have them in flower, because often they are underneath grass or needles, so it's hard to spot the rosettes, but if they're in flower, they're quite easy to detect. Another picture of the habitat, so you see a lot of grass. So the thing is that these habitats normally, they are getting burned by thunderstorms, but that of course nobody wants nowadays anymore, so because there's wood plantations around, so they don't like to have a fire there. So you have to organize it in a way that you burn it, but you don't harm the rest of the area around. So that means you have to do it artificially. So they are putting fires there on a regular basis. After several years, they repeat it to get rid of all the grass, and it's also rid of the bushes, because the problem is if you don't do anything, then you're getting a lot of bushes and the plants will disappear because their habitat is lost. That's why it's important that they clear up the land from time to time. Yeah, on this side there was really a huge variation of flower in cerulea. That's why I wanted to show it to you. Again, typical differentiation here. Cerulea has a very hairy base of the flower stalks, also hairy at the base of the leaves. If you look a little bit closer, you can see that, which is not present in Lutea. So just to give you an idea about what flower variation we have found there, some deep violet venation, and also the color of the leaves are much more violet, the nice, very hairy palette, if you can see here, and also typical on the side of the tube is also very hairy. You can find also flowers like this, which is less intense in violet, more pale violet, and has a very nice venation. And this is just growing side by side, so there must be a lot of cross-pollination going on between the different types. And then I wanted to show you also a lateral view of a flower, which shows again the nice venation on the tube. You see that the tube is a little bit more funnel-shaped, a little bit broader, and maybe you can also see this spur is a little bit shorter, but that of course is depending from plant to plant, that can vary. So in principle, Lutea and cerulea have quite similar characteristics, so they're the most similar, I would say, among all the Pinguicula species. Yeah, there were also lighter ones which were having less violet coloration on the leaves. Here you have a more intense one with a very intensive venation on the lobes. Also the tube has a very intensive coloration. But you will also find some almost white. It's not a pure white one. As you can see, there are still some venations here at the base of the petals. Unfortunately, we haven't seen any pure white ones or albino type, but at least that was coming close to it. Yeah, there's also Pinguicula lutea growing in this state preserve, and you see again the habitat a little bit. You see the pine needles from the pine trees there, which cover the soil and also has an impact also on the acidity, because normally in pine tree areas you have a lower acidity in the soil. Yeah, there were not that many plants there flowering, therefore I would not like to spend too much time. And here you see again, it's covered with glands, but there's not the hairy, as you can see in the cerulea species. And the rosettes are a little bit more compact. They are not that elongated, the leaves, compared to the side that we have seen before. So there's a little differentiation in that as well from location to location, but nevertheless they have the same characters as described in the variety, in the species description. Yeah, just one photo from a flower from Lucia that we have seen there. It was quite nice. You might have also recognized that in Cerealia you have only one insertion in the petal at the end, while in Lucia it can vary from almost nothing to 4 or 5 insertion in one petal, so that's very variable there. And there's a third species growing in that preserve as well, which is Pinguicula pumila, and you see a little bit difference in the habitat there, because there are quite a lot of mosses which you haven't seen on the other photographs for Cerealia and Lucia. And whenever it's getting, I would not say it's wet because it was also relatively dry, but I think it's a little bit more wetter because otherwise you would not find the mosses growing there. And yeah, pumila has a big variation and variability in the flower shape, in the flower color, and that's really quite impressive. It's not everywhere that it's that variable, but at this location it was very nice what variation you can find with the pumila, and that's why I wanted to show you. Yeah, even at a small spot you see a lot of differences in colors, in size, in petal forms, in insertion. It's really impressive if you see such, and there were really a lot of plants growing there. You see how variable this species really is. You see the palette, the big difference towards the other species is that the palette is not getting outside of the tube. For the other 2 species, they exert the tube, the palette extended outside of the tube. But pumila, it's just at the entrance of the tube, and there it's ending. So it's never getting outside of the tube. I mean, sometimes you see flowers can be a little bit similar, but you can easily see it with the flowers. I mean, they're anyway a little bit smaller, but the palette is definitely different, and that's the only species where the palette is not getting outside. So, as I said, a lot of variation. They're very dark, violet coloration with nice venation on the tube, and here you see it's whitish, so even there's a lot of variation in the color of the palette as well. Also, the tube can differ, and can be violet, it can be whitish, it can be yellowish. I mean, there's a lot of variation also from that. And you see what is also a characteristic is that the spur is more or less as long as the tube. That's very long for this species. It can be also rose color, so there's really a nice variation within the species. It makes it very attractive. And what you can observe from time to time is also the venation on the leaf. I once had the chance to see plants which were almost red, but I only have seen it once. Normally what you can find, either they are just green or having this venation on the leaves, but the red ones are really, really rare. And we haven't seen any during this tour, by the way. Yeah, there are also other carnivorous plants growing in this area, and one is Sarracenia minor. I think all the tubes are from last year, so there are only new ones coming up here, as you can see, but I think the other ones stayed from last year. And there's a quite nice population there, a little bit away from the Pinguiculas, because here the site was a little bit wetter, so they were growing in more wetter habitats. So just an idea, they look like very typical Sarracenia minor. And what is also quite common there is Drosera capillaris, that you find almost everywhere. So that's probably the most widespread species of carnivorous plants, because it's really hard to find a space without Pinguicula. And we had the chance that they also were starting to flower at this moment in time. Just a close-up of some plants. And what is also present, if you go really to the wetter areas, because this is not just 2 meters away, but it was about 50 meters away, you could also find a number of Orticularia species. This one, Orticularia convoluta, unfortunately, where some insects were eating on it, so it's not that nice anymore. We've also seen Utriculata vesiculata, a very tiny one, so it was hard to get good pictures of that one. And as it was wet, as you can see, so you could not only get on your knees, I mean, at least you could, but you could get wet afterwards. And the other one was Utricularia purpurea that we were seeing there as well in flower. And the last one was, and we were not 100% sure, but I compared it to photos, as I'm not a specialist on Utricularia, but I assume it's Utricularia furiosa that we have seen there as well. Okay, now we're moving quite far towards the west. We are now in the so-called panhandle of Florida, so that means if you have a pen and you keep the pen with your hand, this is the panhandle. I don't know why it's called, because I don't think that it has a form of a pen, but that's how this area is called, panhandle of Florida. So you see here's the capital of Florida, and now we are in the region of the Apalachicola River, and there's the Apalachicola Forest over there, so a state forest, and that's also, especially to Sarracenia growers, a quite known place, but it's also famous for some Pinguicula species. So we are now down at the, more or less at the Gulf of Mexico, starting to take the road up, and the first species I would like to present is Pinguicula ionanta. I said it's very restricted, has a very restricted area, but as you can see here, it is growing mainly in very wet areas. So it likes very much wet areas. This plant is more or less standing in the water. And so it's also growing in grasses, but as I said, it's always along areas where the water level is close to the plant. And it's also flooded from time to time, because when there's rain coming, so the water level is rising quickly, because the soil is not draining very well in Florida. That means if there's a heavy rainfall, then it takes quite some time until the water disappears again. So especially those species which are close to standing water, that they get normally also flooded for a certain time. And that's the case also for Pinguicula ionanta. So they're always they're growing in clumps there. I mean, probably they are dividing, because I don't think that those plants are occurring from seed, and as they're also not propagating by leaves, I would say it's probably more by division, because the color of and the form of the flowers were mostly identical in these clumps. Yeah, and that's how Pinguicula ionanta rosette is looking like. So a little bit more rounded tips, elongated, not that much upturned compared to the Cerulea or the lutea plants you have seen, and always in very wet conditions. So the flower typical is the whitish or the purple petals with having a purple circle in the end, and the yellowish palette, which is also extending outside, or exceeding outside of the tube, which is also very hairy, comparable to lutea. And there is always this one insertion on the edge of the petal. It can get also a little bit more whitish, but the variability is not that much for ionanta. So it's varying between white and pale violet, I would say. But the rest is not differing that much. So palette-wise, it's always yellow, so there's not much differentiation. And you see already the seed capsules, so they make quite a lot of flowers per plant, and you find also then, along with the flowers, also the first seed capsules that are still immature, but they will mature soon. So here again you see the palette going outside of the tube, this venation on the tube, and the very short greenish to olive green spur that is ending with the tube. Again here, Rosetta capillaris present everywhere. It's hard to miss it. And here just some impressions of some other plants which you see is really growing directly in the water here. And that was, let's say, the only more darker form that we have found. So plants which were a little bit darker purple, but again, as I mentioned before, it's all the same flower type, so I assume they divide over time, and over the years it's getting clumps. I haven't seen that for other Pinguicula species like that, but they are really, they have this flower, primarily Florida does it the same, but maybe in a different way, but that's typical for the Ionanta. Yeah, and here was the only spot where we could see two Pinguicula species, which is in the foreground. You see still the flowers of the Pinguicula Ionanta, which are standing in the water, and a little bit further up, in very much more drier conditions, you will find Pinguicula lutea growing here in this. And yeah, it can be quite numerous. So they're at the edge of the forest where it's clearing up. So this is along a road, so you could call it artificial, but in the end it's just what they need. They have to have some clear habitat where they get sunlight and they have not much competition with other plants, and then they're showing up quite numerously, as you can see. And one other species, carnivorous species, that you will find in this area quite often together with lutea is Drosera filiformis, subspecies tracei. So it's not the normal form, it's always subspecies tracei, so the white leaves that you can find that's going along with the luteas that we've seen at quite a number of places. Here just some impressions of the flowers there. Not very much different from the ones that we have seen before at other sites, but there is one difference, and I hope that it can be seen here on the picture. The color is there are some colors which are a little bit different, so it has more lemon color. But I think there's one picture coming. Again, this little venation on the tube, longer the spore, and the pale palette which is exceeding the tube. So here, for example, that's one which has only one insertion here. You see, it has a very lemon color, so it's much lighter compared to the more dark yellow colors that we have seen before, because this was a site which is known to have more lighter yellow colorations there. Yeah, they can also look like this. Almost no insertion here at the petals, so there is quite some variation in lutea. Yeah, and to show you another species that you can find also from time to time, there is Sarracenia psittacina, also growing more in the wetter part, so it's not growing together with the luteas, but you might find it together with Pinguicula Ionanta in the wet part. And yeah, so the tubes are from last year, but you see already the new flowers coming up and also the new leaves forming now. Yeah, as I mentioned, Drosera filiformis is quite common there, so just to give you an impression, so it's really everywhere. So wherever you go, you find Drosera filiformis there. It's quite impressive. Unfortunately, they were not yet flowering, but even that was quite impressive to see. And what we also have found in flower was then Sarracenia rosea, if that is now the name that you want to use. And yeah, it's quite, you see it from the road, because with this pinkish flowers, I mean, they're quite obvious, and you see it quite quickly, even though the leaves are from last year, they're still the old pictures there, but the flowers are quite impressive, and there are some stands which have quite a lot of Sarracenias there, so that was quite nice. So now we were going up from this area up, and now we are going down again and coming now to a place which is called Sumatra. So a lot of people growing Sarracenia, especially the variety rubricorpora will know this place probably, because that's quite famous for that one. But there are also carnivorous Pinguicula species growing there, so that's quite an impression where we were there more or less in the evening. So this is again longleaf pine tree plantation grasses. You're missing the palmettos, palm trees. They are not present in this area. But in the end, it's again savanna type with grasses, and you have again drier and wetter areas. So you see probably here already the flowers from Sarracenia flava, which are growing more in the wetter part of this area. So just to give you an impression, it's really wet, and even this was in dry season, so there was, I think there was no rain for quite a couple of weeks, but nevertheless, as I said, the soil is not draining very well. The water is standing for quite a long time, yeah, and probably this is the lowest level it gets, because when there's a rain, probably this will be all flooded and the plants will be underneath the water for quite some time. Also in this wetter part, I think they are not the pine trees anymore, because you see less needles, sorry. There are some trees that probably support these wet conditions better than the pine trees, because they're not really a tree that grows under such wet conditions. But here we are now seeing another species, which is Pinguicula planifolia, and there you have really big plants. I mean, it was really, 15 centimeters in diameters. There were plants that could reach really big ones. And they are really growing in the wet areas in the middle of the water. As you can see here or here, they are really extremely wet. And a lot of people think Pinguicula planifolia is always this deep red, bright color, but as you can see here, it can be, but it not necessarily must be this color. There's also other coloration of the leaves, even if they are exposed to direct sunlight, doesn't mean they always turn that reddish. So here, for example, you have one which is more greenish, has a light red coloration. They are a little bit more red, but it's not that all the planifolia plants have this dark red color. Of course, there are some. And so this is, by the way, another location in this area. So you have spots where all the plants have this color, but you have other spots where you don't find any of those red colors. So don't think planifolia is always that. But nevertheless, it's a nice color. So here another one which is deep red, and again you see the Rosa capillaris growing beside that. If you see the soil, it's not sand anymore. Here we really have muck. If you walk through, you see it under your boots. It's quite sticky on your boots, and so it's really wet, mucky soil. So I think the aeration of the roots must be very low, because they're always standing in the water. So they must have a way of getting the oxygen to the root somehow, because it's also not flowing waters, as with some people that you say, okay, the oxygen comes from the flowing, but here it's really standing water. There's almost no flow of water beside up and down. And if you grow planifolia at home, because some people ask me if they have problems with that, I mean, keep them as wet as possible. Flood them, they love it. So if you keep them even for a week below the water level, you will see they're getting bigger and bigger. So they love the wet waters. I mean, in winter you have to have a little bit less water, because then it's cooler temperatures, we have more Florida temperatures here. So there's a risk that they might want to keep it a little bit less wet, but in summertime with temperatures like the last weeks, just give them water as much as. So as I said, they are not always red, they have also other colors. They are going to the greenish olive ones, so there's a lot of variation in the leaves. And a big difference to the other species, as you can see, there's really flat rosettes, separated leaves. The margins are not that upcurved, so that's why it's called planifolia, maybe because they're really lying flat on the ground. So a little bit, not only from the color, also the shape of the rosette, you can see that they are different from the other species. If they are not flowering, you have no chance to very flourish. Here again one picture of some plants really, as you can see the water standing, it's really only growing in this wet area, and when the water is disappearing they're also gone. You won't see any planifolia anymore. Yeah, flower can be also quite variable. So if you read through the species description, then one character is that the petals are inserted quite significantly to 1/3, which you can see that can vary as well. So maybe they have not that, but it's also quite hairy. Yeah, but it's in dimension, it's much smaller. And in most cases, you have also seen this violet circle around the entrance of the tube. And then I just give you impressions of the colorations and the forms. That it's really quite variable. At that side, it was really the most variable I've ever seen. So it can get also quite dark violet. Typical here is the short greenish spur, which is in a more or less 45-degree angle towards the tube, and the tube is much less funnel shaped. Just at the end, it's getting more funnel shaped, but then it's getting more parallel. So it's normally easy to differentiate that species from the rest, even without seeing a flower. So you can see here the insertion is going also quite deep, very slender, narrow petals, and very nice violet color. Here it's a more broader petal. Yeah, very, very nice species. And it can also look like this, very long, very narrow petals with just the insertion at that. It has very, very nice variation at that side. Yeah, and again, Drosera capillaris. This time, it's the petioles are much longer and greenisher. Also, I don't see any difference in habitat. A lot of sun going in, but they were looking a little bit different, but still the same species. And what you also can find in this area is again Sarracenia psittacina, but you have very reddish plants there. Quite nice. Unfortunately, they had not too many new pictures, but okay. And what you can see there as well, and what's also quite famous, is the Sarracenia flava ribelli types. We have fields which are full of them, and we were lucky at least of some new tubes, because it was not yet the time where they are all producing tubes, but we had at least the chance to see some of them. And also what I mentioned, this rubricorpora, you could also see some of the tubes which in a really dark reddish color, but which you also could see outside here at different rows. Okay, coming to another side, and the reason why I wanted to show you that is because there's another Sarracenia growing with it. So this is again a location. I think I missed it. So we are now really at the very edge of Florida. So this is already Alabama. So it's just a few kilometers away from the border, and we are here also very close to the sea, at a location here east of Pensacola Sea. And it's again a roadside, but there were quite nice lutea plants growing again together with Drosera filiformis, and this time you also could see the nice red flowers of Sarracenia leucophila, which were just appearing and which made it quite attractive to stop at that site. So here a rosette of Pinguicula lutea, and you see it's much more condensed. It's not that long as you've seen in other locations that I've shown you before, but nevertheless it's Pinguicula lutea, and just again for differentiation, just glands, no hairs at the base of the stalk, so easy to differentiate. Just some impressions of the flower. It was also quite variable from just one insertion to 3, 4 insertion. Again here with this lemon color, so it was also quite nice population there, and especially in the evening sun, the nice leaves of the Drosera filiformis. And as I mentioned, yeah, there was nice Sarracenia leucophila which were starting to flower, and luckily there were at least some tubes that we could see and to show you here on my presentation. So now we are coming to another place, heading back a little bit to the east, and this is a location which is very different from what we have seen before, because this is now the habitat of Pinguicula primuliflora, and that is really different. So this species is just growing along streams, along small creeks, or also at springs where there's a lot of water in the area, and they are really in very, very wet conditions there when they grow. So it was, at this point we were lucky to cross the river, because it was an area where it was quite flat, where you could walk through. Not sure if after heavy rain you could still do it, but we were lucky that at that point in time this was really possible, that we could reach the plants because they were growing on the other side of the river. Yeah, and then we were quite lucky to find a huge population of Pinguicula primuliflora that were also in flower. And you also can see already on the third picture, they are almost growing in the water, and it's really swampy. It's hard to walk there because it's really the border of the river, which is a lot of organic material, and you have to pay attention because if you walk at the wrong point, you might get 45, 50 centimeters down with your feet, and if you wear boots, it's not that easy to get out again anymore. So, and yeah, just to give you some impressions, so this one, for example, is walking, growing along a tree base, where also the water is not far away. And as I mentioned before, they also look very similar, the flowers, so I think they also belonging to the same genotype, but I would say it's probably more propagation by leaf plantlets that are propagated at the end of the leaf. Of course, I haven't seen that often that the primuliflora does divide that easily. I haven't checked it because it's difficult to check, but I would think it's more the way they are going to make these clumps with the same genotype. Here again, really at the riverside with more dark violet petals, and you see also very elongated leaf which are growing more or less directly in the water, and you can already see here. So the water level varies a little bit in 20 centimeters, I would guess. When there's a heavy rain, the water will rise, and then of course the plants are all standing in the water. But for that species also it's not an issue. Yeah, primuliflora is very typical, flowers with the violet outside of the petals, then more or less whitish area, and then towards the entrance of the tube it's getting yellowish. But also there's some variation, especially at that side we have seen quite a lot. Here, for example, some overlapping petals. And here you can see the palette is very similar to what we have seen with Lutea, so there we will differentiate. Here more cuneiform petals, which are not overlapping at all. Just the side view, so the tube is always yellowish with having this reddish venation on the outside as well. So that's also a typical character of primuliflora. But they also can get a little bit more paler. So here you have not that much variation in the violet towards the tube. And you also can have very pure white forms as well. So that, for example, is really pure white. So very nice spot there, which gets a good impression of how variable that species in respect to flower is. So now we are heading again towards the south. We are now on the west coast, north of Tampa. And here I want to show you a site which is more or less close to the sea, 500 meters away. And this is a so-called Aripeka Sandhills Preserve. So in the past, this was a phosphate mine. So they were mining phosphate. And as this is close to the sea, and most of the Florida Peninsula is based on a riff, so the calcareous material. So this is all calcareous artificially, because this was digging out of the soil to get the phosphate, so this is more an artificial area. But nevertheless, it was quite well suited for Pinguicula pumila again. And this was, compared to the other, very, very dry one. I mean, it's also sandy on top. Underneath there will be calcareous, because at the border of that area, I mean, there is almost no soil, a little bit soil, but not much. But the plants were grown really in very dry area, and sometimes even in the sun. But also here a very nice variation in the colors, and there were a lot of flowers, also plants in flower. We were quite lucky. Just to give you an impression, so that the rosettes are quite big, about 4 or 5 centimeters in diameter, and a lot of different flower shapes and flower types again, just to go through and give you an impression. Overlapping, heavier insertion, less insertion. That one a little bit special, very elongated. And here again a deep violet flower border. what is also sometimes, can you see that the palette is in two parts? Sometimes if it's too hairy you cannot see it, but here on the picture you can see that it's a two-part palette that is exerting there. And finally, a more rare purple color that we have seen that only once. Okay, and then that's the last slide. Hope I'm still more or less on time. The last slide I wanted to show you, and now if you remember the map with the different climate zones, we are now in the tropical area. And here is the Everglades area and one area which is called Big Cypress Swamp, because there are huge cypress forests there, while the Everglades mostly consist of grassland. And that's more or less the area where there is kind of a mix between both. But this is, and the reason why we were there is, that's one of the sites where there is the yellow flowering pumila to grow. So that's why we wanted to head there. We had, by the way, we had another location which is a little bit here, which also should contain some pumilas with yellow flowers, but when we were at the place it was so dry there was no plant at all. So that's something which is very special for pumila. So in the description of the species it is considered a perennial, but the environment conditions drive also the vegetation and the generation of this species. So that means, especially in the drier area, it can be that the plants are disappearing completely. They would live longer if the conditions would be okay, but under a lot of conditions, especially in the south, where you have drier conditions there, which, because it's hotter, then it can happen that the whole population is just dying and coming back by seeds if the next rain is coming. So here it is, in contrast, it's a very wet area. So the plants are not dying through drought, they're dying because they are flooded with water. Because this is a typical cypress forest. You see here we're still in the dry season, there's still no water standing, but normally if the rain is coming, then you will have everything is flooded there. And as I said, there is somehow the cypress forest getting into the Everglades, so there are spots which are less with trees, and that is a place where we were trying to find Pinguicula pumila with yellow flowers. And so you see this is completely different soil. This is muddy soil. So I was surprised that you would find any Pinguicula there, because I would not expect them to grow there. And as you can see, they have just formed a few leaves and starting to flower. So first we thought, oh, we are by far too early, and so we will not find anything anymore. But when you looked a little bit more, then we were happy to find also plants in flower. So you see here only 4 or 5 leaves, and then the rosette is pretty tiny, just maybe maximum 2 centimeters in diameter. And but nevertheless, we found some plants that were flowering. Initially, we only found these purplish petals or whitish ones, because this is finally just the 2 flower types that you find. But luckily, we were happy to find at least one plant which was really completely yellow. You have to know that Pinguicula pumila is closing the flower in the evening, and only in the morning or early day it's going to expand and flower and open the flower again. As we were quite early in the morning, as we were flying back to Germany on that day, we only could see it then in the still more or less closed form, so we could not look into inside of the tube. But I just wanted to give you an impression how beautiful that plant is from cultivation. So that is the yellowish form that I have in my cultivation, and you see the very dark yellow petals as well. The tube is very yellow, and you have a nice red veination, and if you see it from the front, intense yellow color with this nice red veination, and they are quite impressive, and I like that form very much. Yeah, so I'm coming to the end of my presentation, and if you go to Florida, especially to the south, pay attention because there are other carnivorous species around that might look for prey and that could be you, so be careful if you find those guys there. They look quite nice, but they could also get after you if they're hungry. So thank you all for your attention.